Funding for the Hinckley Report is made possible in part by the Cleone Peterson Eccles Endowment Fund.
Tonight, on a special edition of the Hinckley Report, we are talking about civility in politics. How has the behavior of politicians evolved over the years?
United, there is little we cannot do.
Now that candidates have embraced the digital age, has politics become more divisive? What role does social media play in shaping perceptions? And how will this new frontier impact campaigns in the future? We have seen historic turnout at demonstrations and town halls. Our nation seems to be more polarized, and the level of discourse does not seem to be improving. What is our responsibility as citizens? How can we break through the noise and find compromise? Good evening, and welcome to the Hinckley Report. I am Jason Perry, Director of the Hinckley Institute of Politics. Covering the week, we have Jennifer Napier Pierce, editor of the Salt Lake Tribune, Pat Jones, former state senator and current chair of the Women's Leadership Institute, and Thomas Wright, former head of the Utah GOP and current committeeman for the Republican National Committee. Thank you so much for being with us today. This is a special edition of the Hinckley Report on civility and politics. Senator, we're going to start with you. Okay. Do these two things even go together anymore?
Well, it seems like they don't, but I think we've had conflict from day one, from the early beginnings of cavemen where they had conflict. But I think the difference now is that we have social media and everyone knows about it. And so it's just so difficult to hear everything at once that you kind of hide in your own corner.
Now, how civil do we expect politics to be, Thomas?
I don't think people expect it to be too civil because, like Pat says, Senator Jones says, from the beginning of time it's been very energetic, so to speak. But I think they do expect a certain degree of respect. That people are going to listen to each other and treat each other with respect. And that's what I think we're lacking more than anything. I think we should be encouraging a vigorous debate of the issues with our children and with everyone in society. It's okay to vigorously debate. We've debated. These are good friends. We don't always agree, and that's okay. It's the way you disagree and what happens after the decision has been made that it's frustrating people.
Is there a difference between civility and respect? You used both of those words right there. Are those the same thing?
I think they're closely related, but I think we have to be really careful about acting like civility is this populism where we don't ever take a stand and we don't ever want to talk about tough issues, because we do have to talk about tough issues. And if people are only comfortable talking about them on social media anonymously or on the blogs at the end of a newspaper article, then that's lacking civility. We should come out of the shadows and feel comfortable talking about our positions and not be worried about the retribution that might come with it.
Mm-hmm. What kind of deference, Jennifer, should we give to those differences of opinion? People can be very ardent about their particular position. How much do we have to entertain the other side?
You mean, do we let people finish a sentence? Yes, I think absolutely hear an argument to its end, but at some point, as Thomas said, I do think that there is a role for truth. So it's okay to interject when you have facts and you have statistics, you have some information that will inform the discussion.
Well, that brings up a very interesting question too about what truth is these days. Right? This has been a big discussion for many as to kind of what news source do you use? I mean, so how do we define what truth I'm using now to form my opinions?
Well, I guess from the news perspective, I mean, I think Senator Jones is absolutely right that we've always had these disagreements, that social media has sort of broadened the base of discussion. On the other hand, what we're missing is the filter that, as you know, traditional news organizations have had. We've always had a layer of editorial control. We've always had fact checking. We've always had documentation that's required. So now when you've got this robust information, this discussion that's going on social media, there's not that editorial filter to say, hey, wait a minute. You know, there is a crowdsourcing element to it. I think people are responding and calling others out and saying that's absolutely bunk. But the message is still out there before it's been fully vetted.
Have you ever seen a more important time for journalists ever than now?
Well, as we were talking before, I'm not sure because I didn't live through Watergate, but I suspect that there was also a tremendous role for journalists to play. But now it does feel like a journalist's moment to shine, and we have to step up to that plate. I mean, we can't get anything wrong. If we do, boy, we're skewered, right?
Right. I think it's the way I would say it is there's never been a more important time for journalistic integrity, because the journalistic integrity is everything with the social media age. Because if people are going to formulate their opinion from 2 or 3 posts they see in social media on their way to their break at work, and that isn't totally accurate, then that's going to change the landscape. It's going to change the discussion. People need a source, a bedrock to be able to go to and know that the facts are going to be presented in a non-subjective way so that they can make an informed decision. If they feel like the news or the journalism is slanted at all, then we're off. Then we're already off course, and that's what's happened in some spaces in America today. Whether it's true or not, I'm not going to argue. But people feel like there's a slant, and when they feel like there's a slant, they discount the entirety of it. And when that happens, now they're formulating opinions from all kinds of random sources, and we can't get to the truth and have that vigorous, honest debate.
But we also need integrity with those that represent us.
Oh, absolutely.
So,
yeah.
you know, and I think there's been in the past a lot of times when they've gotten away with things, but because now we have different ways of finding out things, that it's more important now today than ever.
Well, let's talk about that point for just a minute, because some of that assumes that people are trying to find kind of that unslanted opinion, right? That unslanted story. There seems to be some polarization in the country right now that people are gravitating more to the positions that they agree with, whether they are right or wrong. I mean, how do we get that back? I mean, in the press, that's something you're trying to grapple with, right?
Well, absolutely. And I think that, again, we have to, as traditional media journalists with a code of ethics and processes to allow us to get to the heart of the matter, to get to facts. I mean, I do think that you have to cut through that. You have to prove yourself every single day with credible information. I mean, that's the only way that you can sort of poke a hole in people's bubble. I think if you can self-select and get into an echo chamber, it just keeps going and going around. And so traditional journalists have to keep poking at it and make sure that people are exposed to opposing points of view.
That's right.
But one of the problems is you have governments and people in power who really are becoming more opaque. They have meetings behind closed doors. They make decisions behind closed doors, and we certainly see it in our legislature. In my opinion, there are a lot of decisions made in a closed caucus, for instance, and they spring it on people. And when you have opaqueness, that breeds distrust with people. And so I just think having more transparency and having open to the press. Things that are more open to the press, I think, is helpful.
But I think back to the redistricting when I was chairman back in 2010, and the accusation was the legislature was meeting behind closed doors, and the Democrats were saying that they were having these open caucus meetings. But then when we did the grandma request, we found out they were actually having a conference call on Sunday night with themselves, and then coming to the legislature and acting like they were having the open caucus meeting. Well, and I'm not countering just Senator Jones, but that was found in the grandma request.
No.
And so I point that out for one simple reason: is Senator Jones is right in what she's saying. We do need more transparency. Decisions should not be made. I agree with her. But what we don't need is that grenade thrown out there like the whole system is bad, because that's where the civility starts to break down. Because if that's the only thing you know about the legislature is the soundbite that they meet behind closed doors, now we're not talking about issues. We're not talking about education funding. We're not talking about the air. We're not talking about our homelessness issue, the issues that Utahns really care about. I would rather see a scenario where we say, hey, let's sit down and talk about these issues together, because I said this a lot, and Jennifer, you remember this when I was chairman and Senator DeBacchus was the Democrat chairman. We used to say all the time, we're very different guys, right? And we used to say, we probably agree on 90% of the issues. But for whatever reason, the media and society and the political parties, which are part of the problem, and I represent one of them, tend to get us all focused on this 10% and divide us. And then the lack of civility ensues, and we don't get to the point where we agree, we want more funding for education, we want teachers to make more, we want cleaner air. We all want those things. So let's get to those things instead of throwing these grenades out there.
See, and I agree with much of what you're saying, but I will say, having been there and sitting in our minority caucus and waiting for the closed Republican caucus to make decisions and then have one of their people come and tell us what they've decided, I think that's wrong.
Yeah.
Now you know how the press feels, right? We're always on the outside.
And I've never been there. I can't speak to Senator Jones's perspective. She makes a good point. I've already agreed that that should not be going on. But we don't want to throw out just a soundbite that defines the whole process. Let's get people up to the legislature. Let's get more people engaged in it so they see. And that will create the transparency. Believe me, when more people are up there and they see what's going on, that will create more. But a healthier dialogue starts with trying to see the perspective. State legislatures all across the country and our national Congress all caucus behind closed doors. Happens in every single state. This is not a Utah problem.
Well, let's talk about this for a second, but not really behind the closed doors kind of idea. Are our elected officials more removed from the people they represent than before? Are they more isolated?
I think people in general are more isolated. You're seeing a great number of people now that have mental health issues, especially with our young people. And it's because they're more isolated. I think a lot of it is because of social media, but it's a very complex place now, this world, and I just think we feel more isolated.
Okay, I just don't want this to sound like, well, I trudged up the hill in 6 feet of snow when I was a kid. I mean, social media is not the evil, that it's put out to be. It can be a very empowering tool. It can allow a lot of people, a whole range of people, to get involved in a public conversation. So I don't want to make it sound like it's, the good old days and we never had these fights before. The fights existed. There is a tool. I think the difference is speed, because we're seeing discussions in real time, and also volume. I mean, just so many more people are part of a conversation than they have been before, and it's kind of messy.
I think more people are looking to solidify what they already think. In other words, I'd encourage people on the right, when I was the Republican chairman, watch less Fox News and watch more MSNBC. And I would encourage people on the left, watch less MSNBC and watch more Fox News. Get out of the echo chamber, as Jennifer put, a perfect term, of your Facebook group where everybody agrees with you, and get into one where everyone disagrees with you. And it isn't because you're wrong or because you should compromise your principles. It's because you should try to understand the other point of view, because you will learn something from that.
That is such a great point. I love what you just said, because one of the things that I did when I was in the Senate is, if I can give a real quick story, we had a tour in Salt Lake County, and they sent us an email and said, do not bring your guns with you, your concealed weapons permit, your concealed weapons, because we're going to a refinery and they don't allow them on their facility. And so we drove up in the bus, and all of a sudden about 6 legislators get off the bus and go check their guns in this van that they had rented behind us. And I think there were several of us that were really upset with that. We were really quite angry with that, because we were told specifically not to bring them, which I wouldn't have anyway. But, the fact that some did. And so right after that, one of the senators that had brought his gun and checked it was walking alone. And I went up to him and said, help me understand why it is so important to you to have that gun on you at all times. And his answer helped me understand him. His answer was that when he was on a city council, he had been threatened. His family had been threatened. I understood him then. Was it the right thing to do for him? No. I mean, in my opinion, no. But that kind of civility is lacking, where you're trying to understand where other people and why they're behaving the way they are. We need just exactly what Thomas says.
Is that happening? Because your comment was very insightful too. Are people trying to understand the other side now? Is that the aim?
I think that might be part of the problem, and then it gets labeled as lack of civility. If you're looking to be right about every position you take in this country, you can find it. If you want to be right about a certain issue, you can go to a place where everybody will tell you you are right. And you can and when that happens, that's dangerous, because now you're always right and everybody else is always wrong, and that just can't be the case. I remember when I was chairman, I got invited to go to the Equality Utah dinner, and I think they invited me because they didn't think I would go. And when I showed up, I remember specifically we were at KSL at a Mia Love Jim Matheson debate, and I walked up South Temple and went to the Salt Palace Convention Center, and I walked in, and I think they were like, oh no, he's here and we don't have a seat for him, but they found one. But my point was, everybody's so shocked that I walked in there. I mean, I had elected officials on the left coming up to me. Every candidate they endorsed was a Democrat, and I was happy to be there to try to understand a different point of view. It wasn't that I agreed with the whole thing, and I wasn't compromising my values, but then you saw a few years later in the legislature, landmark legislation that's looked at around the country for equality. And that was important because people started to listen to each other's points of view. So and I haven't been the perfect example of it, but we can all do a better job of saying, hey, I'm convicted, but let's go see the other side. Let's watch some MSNBC. I get a kick out of it, right?
Yeah.
I learn things every time.
When you talk about this, getting to understand the other side, I want to bring up this word. I'm curious, Jennifer, if it's a bad word now, all right? This compromise. All right, compromise. Is this become just a negative? Because I'll set the stage. You kind of look back at the Ted Kennedy, Orrin Hatch, kind of that relationship. There's rivals always at each other, but in the end, they found the middle ground in legislation. Where have we gone as a country in terms of our perception of compromise?
Gosh, I do think if you look to Congress for change, it's just not there. So there is no compromise happening. And I think part of what we're seeing in the current healthcare debate is just a lack of the ability to take a piece here and take a piece here and try and put it together and make something that is workable for people. I don't know. I don't see a lot of art of compromise. Are you seeing it on Capitol Hill here?
No, compromise has become a pejorative word.
It is.
And a pejorative way to behave, it seems like.
So is it a pejorative for the people? Is it for the elected officials?
I think it's looked upon now as a weakness in many cases, and it shouldn't. It should be, you look at our forefathers. We got our Constitution because they compromised. The Great Compromise, right?
Sometimes on first down, getting 3 yards is a victory, right? You're not always trying to get a first down on every play or score a touchdown. Sometimes moving the football down the field is forward motion. And sometimes I think people think in politics, unless I can score on every play or get everything I want on the first try, that I've failed. And that isn't true in life, it's not true in football, and it's definitely not true in politics.
Very interesting. So, Senator, when you've been running for office and you talk to the people, if you had your first 3 yards, all right, you had something that got you the first 3 yards like he's just talking about, are your constituents happy with that? Or do they come to say, hey, we wanted the touchdown, all right?
No, I think people like civility and they like compromise. Absolutely. They expect it. They expect it from us because the world is not black and white.
That's not the message that we hear in our state conventions, though. I mean,
that's a different story. those are the fringes on both sides.
I don't know anything about state conventions.
No, you don't.
But, from the media perspective, it does seem that people who are more strident in their views are attracted to the convention, and that is who. The pool of people who elect our elected officials.
Yeah, and back to the question of Washington, D.C., do you think that Citizens United correlated with the time when we got the Do Nothing Congress and the lack of civility? There's such huge amounts of anonymous money in politics now because of Citizens United, which was the worst thing that's happened to the American political landscape in my lifetime. And that anonymous amount of money creates so much fear from people because they can hit you so hard at any time they want. And so I'm hoping that somewhere along the way, the Supreme Court can correct that decision. I believe in free speech. I believe corporations should have freedom of speech. But the unlimited amount of contributions you can give to a PAC anonymously is so dangerous, and it's so not what we're about in this country. And it does correlate the timing to the Do Nothing Congress that the Democrats once controlled under Pelosi and that the Republicans had under Boehner and now Ryan. And it's such a polarized environment because of those super PACs.
But you're part of leadership. Why can't you help that happen?
I'm not part of the Supreme Court. I think the Supreme Court made a huge mistake on that. I think the court's made a few mistakes along the way, in my opinion. But the Citizens United was a big mistake because that was about the time we had McCain-Feingold. We're getting campaign finance reform. We were starting to get some structure around it, and then the court just opened Pandora's box and said corporations are citizens and they give as much as they want and they can do it anonymously. And so now citizens, you and I only can give a certain amount of money and it has to be reported, and a corporation offshore in Europe can give an unlimited amount to a super PAC and they don't have to report where they got it. And then they roll out these ads against candidates and they beat them to a pulp, and these elected officials are scared of those super PACs.
So that seems to be truly the case. How do Utahns feel, Senator, start with you, on these negative ads? Because you're right, unlimited money can go into just serious attacks, right?
Anonymous unlimited money.
Right. Yeah.
So how do people feel about that? How does that play in Utah?
It's interesting because in my past profession, that's what I did, is I tested advertising and qualitative research. And what we find is it's okay to look at someone's voting record, but not to personally attack that person. Although negative ads seem to work if they're over and over. But I mean, I will give you an example of what happened to me. Is one of my Senate races, there was an ad that my opponent put out that was completely false, and it made me so angry. But I just called him personally and asked him, why did you do that? This was wrong, this was wrong, this was wrong. And he said, I'm really sorry. He says, I was not in charge of that. It's exactly what Thomas, someone else is in charge. The consultants have taken the reins, if you will, of what is put out there. And I think we need to take ownership of our own campaigns now and say this is, and look through them, and see, I'm willing to do this, but not this.
Well, can you win if that's the case?
Yes.
Well, the senator makes a great point. Not only is it unlimited anonymous, the candidate isn't allowed by law to coordinate with the PAC. So they can't even talk to him. So when the candidate says, I had nothing to do with that, they're telling the truth if they're law abiding. If they were talking to him, they broke the law. And so now it's even more anonymous. There's even less accountability,
right.
and the message just spirals out of control. And so, but the public views it and they say, wow, this race is really nasty. When really you have two candidates that aren't coordinating with the super PACs that are spending tens of millions of dollars tearing each other apart, and they're not allowed to coordinate with them. Citizens United was a terrible mistake.
We've gone from civility to the root of all evil, money, right?
Turns out we found it. Okay, so in the final couple of minutes, we have to really talk about what we do about it, right? Sounds like we have one idea. You'd like to see a court decision overturned, perhaps, right?
Yes.
Or readjusted. Jennifer, where do you think we can go from here? Give us a start, just a place we can go to try to reinstill, assuming people do want civility.
Right.
In
Well,
politics.
I mean, for the local media, we absolutely have to do our best every single day to make sure that our facts are right, that the information that we're presenting is credible, that people can believe and trust us. And so, gosh, I think that when we are able to provide information that people can trust, then they can talk to each other with a full slate of information and, hopefully come to compromise, hopefully be able to talk to each other as you would across a dinner table instead of, shouting on social media.
You've done a great job of the online content and people be able to contribute there. In what ways are you looking with the paper to try to address the social media aspects of the putting the truth out there?
Well, the sad reality is do not look at the Salt Lake Tribune comment section because it can be a cesspool. I mean, part of it is a financial decision. I don't want to hire people to monitor those comments. I want reporters. So it comes down, again, to money. But I think that everybody has a responsibility to recognize that words matter, that facts matter, and when they're on social media, to take a little bit of personal responsibility.
Do you ever read those message boards?
I don't. I have to say I don't.
I stopped reading them a long time ago.
No.
They say you can't feed the trolls, right? That's what the phrase is, just reading those things. But politicians often can't help themselves.
Well, and they're hiring people to go out and put comments about themselves in articles they're in.
Are you serious?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah.
That's happening?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. And you can tell which ones they are if you just read the comments a couple times.
You start figuring it out.
Yeah.
Just one final comment, too, from you, Senator. What do you think? Where do we start?
I think we tap people that we know that would make great candidates for office, tap them on the shoulder and encourage them to run for office. In particular, women. Women tend to be more collaborative. Not all women are collaborative, but I think you'd see a whole different ballgame if you had more women in office.
Thomas, we got maybe 20 seconds. This is such an important point, though. Because it's so uncivil out there, are the best people willing to jump into the fray?
No. I talk to people. I recruited candidates when I was a Republican Party chairman. We would go to great people who would have been great, women included, and they look at it and they say, no thanks. It's too much. It's not that they're worried about it. They just don't want to do it.
Wow.
It's because they don't know the benefits.
Yeah.
And I think that's
but we need to encourage them to do it. We do need more women, absolutely. And I'll just close by saying the one antidote to all this is get to know people one-on-one. Get to know people one-on-one. Before you slam somebody on social media, call them and give them a chance, meet with them face-to-face. If we knew each other better as people, we'd give each other the benefit of the doubt. And let's be honest, we all need the benefit of the doubt. We're all flawed and we're all doing the best we can.
That's going to have to be the last word on it. Very great comments. Increasing civility. 3 people right here. And finally, this is Pledge Week on KUED. Your generous support helps us provide the needed funding to keep the Hinckley Report and other news and analysis programs on the air and online. Please take a moment to consider supporting KUED with your important contribution. In a moment, we will be back to provide you with some more details. I'm Jason Perry. Thank you for watching. We'll see you next week.